Yeshua comes the first coming as the Alpha. At the return, he comes as the Omega. The first time it was the beginning of salvation. When he returns, it's the end, the completion of redemption. 8 is total completion, rising above. He reveals himself as the Omega and puts an end to the enemy and sin and death, and the permanency of his kingdom is established. The rabbis teach that the world can only exist for a maximum of 6,000 years before the Messiah has to come. So we're right now in the year 5781. Messiah he can come earlier, but he has to come. The limit of when Messiah has to come is 6,000 years. Where does this come from? One day with the Lord is like 1,000 years. So just like God created the world in 6 days and he rested, and then the Sabbath, the 6 days of the week on the creation calendar point to the 6,000 years that the world can exist, where we can work, where mankind goes about his business as usual. But the 7th day of the week is the Sabbath. The Sabbath corresponds to the Messianic kingdom. So in Jewish thought, Shabbat is known as Yom Shekulo Shabbat. Or can you say that? Yom Shekulo Shabbat. Yom Shekulo Shabbat, which means that the Messianic kingdom is known as the time that is all Shabbat. Because the Garden of Eden, there was only Shabbat. There was no working in Eden. It was rest in Eden. It was relationship with God in Eden. That's what the kingdom is going to be. Even the stuff we do for the Lord will be from that place of rest and refreshment and worship and devotion and relationship with him. This is why Sukkot is the holiday of the kingdom. It points to the 7, to the time that is all Shabbat. And that's why it's the holiday of the kingdom and why all the nations of the world are going to go up, Zechariah 14, as we said, to celebrate it. But here's the big question. Here is something so amazing in my mind. So if Sukkot represents the Messianic kingdom and the number 7 and the Sabbath, then the question then becomes, what does Shmini Atzeret point to? The 8th day, the holiday that happens on the 8th day, the day after the 7 days of Sukkot, the Feast of Tabernacles. If Sukkot points to the kingdom, to the millennial kingdom, in which Yeshua will rule and reign for 1,000 years until the end of the 7th millennium of the Hebrew calendar, okay, from 6,000 to 7,000, that's the millennial kingdom, at which time we'll enter into chronologically the 8th millennium. The 8th millennium corresponds to Sukkot, the 8th day celebrated. The 8th millennium corresponds to Shmini Atzeret, the 8th day celebrated right after Sukkot. So as great as the Messianic kingdom is, there's still something better, more glorious. After the 1,000-year millennial kingdom, there's a period known as the eternal state, or in Hebrew, Olam Haba, the world to come. So traditionally in Jewish thought, there's a break between the Messianic kingdom and the world to come. Okay, there's the days of the Messiah and the life of the world to come. So there are these two periods. So this period of Shmini Atzeret or Olam Haba, or the eternal state, is the period that will begin either literally or symbolically at the start of the 8th millennium. So remember that the number 8 represents new beginnings. It represents the supernatural. It represents the transcendent. 8 turned on its side is the number of infinity. It's the infinite. It therefore makes sense that Shmini Atzeret represents a time that is different and more elevated than any other time before it, even the Messianic kingdom, in which all followers of Yeshua will enjoy eternal fellowship with the Lord in the new heaven and earth. So Shmini Atzeret prophetically points to our joyful tarrying in the glorious presence of Yeshua for all eternity. Come on. Right? This is what Revelation talks about. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth passed away, and the sea was no more. And I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down, descending out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I also heard a loud voice from the throne saying, behold, the dwelling of God is among them. Friends, this is Sukkot and Shmini Atzeret fulfilling its ultimate purpose. Because listen, I want you to, amazing connections. You dwell in the sukkah 7 days, but then Jews still dwell. They're not. You don't. We're not. We don't have to dwell in it on Shmini Atzeret. Like you don't have to say a blessing when you dwell, but you still dwell in it. This is, behold, the dwelling of God is among them, and he shall tabernacle with them, and they shall be his people, and God himself will be among them and their God. Come on, this is the fulfillment of the 8, the eternal state. That's going to be great, right? So on Sukkot, we remember God temporarily dwelling among the children of Israel during the wilderness wandering, his presence and his glory that was with them temporarily. And he dwelt in a temporary structure, a tabernacle, right? And the tabernacle, so this was prophetically, this was prophetically fulfilled in part in the incarnation of Yeshua, who was born on Sukkot, and the word became flesh and tabernacles. But it reaches its ultimate fulfillment on Shmini Atzeret, which culminates in the Lord completely and permanently tabernacling among humanity forever. So amazing. Like, so the tabernacle in the wilderness and the temple in Jerusalem were temporary. They were destroyed. Yeshua said it was going to be destroyed. He also said, destroy this temple and I will build it up in 3 days, talking about his body. So the houses of God that have existed historically, even Yeshua's body, his body at the incarnation was all temporary. Sukkot, the Feast of Tabernacles, points to the establishment of the eternal tabernacle of God in Yeshua among the people. So, and this is all supported by the numerical value of Shmini Atzeret, which is Shmini Atzeret equals 1170. So the numerical value of the phrase until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet equals 1170. I will make your enemies a footstool equals 1170, which is from Psalm 110, which in context is prophetically speaking of the Messiah. Adonai declares to my Lord. The Lord says to my Lord. Who is the Lord speaking to the Lord? It's God the Father speaking to the Son. Sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool. It's the promise that Yeshua would be seated at the right hand of the Father in heaven. So the phrase, until I make your enemies a footstool, 1170, this is fulfilled in Shmini Atzeret on the 8th day, when finally, in the eternal state, when finally the Lord crushes the head of Satan underfoot, throwing him into the eternal fire, which occurs at the end of the 1,000-year reign in the millennial kingdom, Revelation chapter 20. There's one rebellion at the end of the Messianic kingdom, and then he throws Satan into the lake of fire once and for all. It's the completion. But let's go deeper. There's more. Yeshua in the book of Revelation and is called the Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end. It's actually referenced back to Isaiah. The Greek phrase, the alpha is the first letter of the Greek alphabet. Omega is the last letter of the Greek alphabet. Omega equals the end, and the Omega equals 1170. The beginning and the end equals 1170, the same numerical value of Shmini Atzeret, and God crushing, and until I make your enemies a footstool under your feet, because the Omega, Yeshua comes the first coming as the Alpha. At the return, he comes as the Omega. The first time it was the beginning of salvation. When he returns, it's the end, the completion of redemption. 8 is total completion, rising above. He reveals himself as the Omega and puts an end to the enemy and sin and death, and the permanency of his kingdom is established. In addition, the Hebrew phrase, the nations and the ends of all the earth will see, As in Adonai has bared his holy arm before the eyes of all the nations, and all the ends of the earth will see the salvation of our God. Guess what? Equals 1170. All the nations and the ends of the earth will see. We'll see what? The salvation of our God fulfilled in Shmini Atzeret. Proverbs 34. Who has gone up into heaven and come down? Who has gathered the wind in the palm of his hands? Who has wrapped the waters in a cloak? Who has established all the ends of the earth? What is his name, and what is the name of his son, if you know? The phrase who has ascended into heaven, or who has ascended, who has gathered the wind, equals, guess what? 1170. The name, what is his name and what is his son's name? His son is the 1170, the one who ascends into heaven and descended, will descend. So the prophetic meaning of Shmini Atzeret will not be fully realized until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet, 1170, thereby defeating Satan once and for all, so that all the nations of the ends of the earth will see 1170. Will see the salvation, see God's salvation, understand that his son is the one who has gone up into heaven and come down, who has gathered the wind, 1170, is none other than Yeshua of Nazareth, the son of David. And when the world realizes this, when this is completed, this will be a day of pure joy. May it come quickly.